because sometimes it takes a moment for Facebook to catch up with us, but I do believe that we are streaming now. Okay, get that in front of me. Pauline Michael has joined. Very good. Let me get the YouTube going. Brilliant. Okay. Who is with us? Where are you tuning in from? Pauline says shalom from Arkansas. James Roth from Indianapolis. James Roth, you are Mr. Faithful. Camille Cole, that's a name I haven't seen, I think, from Florida. Welcome, Camille. Good to have you with us. Nancy Rabinowitz, that's another name I don't think I recognize. Says hello to you, Nancy. I see Janice Beanstalk is with us. Melissa Eiteld Jurid has joined. Here we go. Donna Smith from North Carolina. Diane Cundiff from Florida. Adelu Olanai Olusudo. I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong. From Lagos, Nigeria. Wonderful. Welcome to the show, Adeolu. Who else is with us? Rick Halfley says good day from Oxford, Alabama. Great to have you. Nancy is in Dallas, Texas. Melissa says good evening from Great Neck, New York. Brandon is in from Tennessee. Sandy says she's from Michigan. Michigan is in the house. Robert Clemens from Rising Fawn, Georgia. Nate Bloomberg says shalom from Seattle. It's great to have you all with us. The fact that our virtual Beis Midrash, our virtual classroom is extending across the country and across continents. I love it. Nigeria's in the house. That means the continent of Africa is in the house. Can we get a European? Can we get an Australian? Let me know. Bill Eldridge says, joining from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Mark Kaufman is in from Maryland. Jeffrey Summer from Hayward, California. Wes Bailey from Louisiana. Janet Becker from North Florida. Cynthia Siegel says thank you. Ed Berg in the house from Galloway, New Jersey. And Helena Hamala, I believe, from Finland, right? So Helena's got Europe in the house. Great to have you with us. All right. We are opening a new chapter. We're in Tractate Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos, Daf Tzadi Vav. So that's page 96 of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We're opening chapter 10, so we'll be covering the first Mishnah of chapter 10. What's this new chapter going to be about? We've covered so many different aspects of Shabbos. What's the new chapter about? Carrying on Shabbos. We have talked a lot about carrying on Shabbos. Sal, are you telling us there's another chapter about carrying on Shabbos? Yes, but of course there are different aspects of carrying that we have not covered yet. So here we're going to be talking about the closely related idea that if you throw something from one domain to another, or you throw something more than 4 cubits in the public domain, that's going to violate the Torah prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. But we're also going to drill down now, even though we've talked so much about carrying, we haven't talked about the source of this prohibition, and we're going to get into that tonight. All right, so the Mishnah, the first Mishnah of chapter 10, we learned something pretty curious. So first of all, throwing. Right? We know that we can't carry an object as long as it's more than the minimum measure to become significant, to render it significant. We cannot carry an object from a private domain to a public domain, or from a public domain to a private domain on Shabbos. And we're going to be liable to bring a sin offering if we do that, if we make that transgression unwittingly. And we've learned that one person has to do the whole transgression if you pass to somebody else so that you picked up in the private domain, but they put it down in the public domain. So then we're going to be exempt because neither of us did the whole thing. If both of us combined to carry something that either of us could have carried alone, then we would have not done the whole transgression ourselves. Now we're going to learn about the related idea of throwing. Throwing does constitute a form of carrying because you picked it up, let's say in the private domain, you threw it into the public domain, so you caused it to be set down in the public domain. If you do that, you're going to have you will have violated the Torah prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, and you will be liable to bring the sin offering when the temple is standing. If you throw it from the public domain to the private domain, same rule. Interestingly, however, now if you carry something from a private domain to a private domain, a neighboring private domain, you're not going to be liable. If you throw something from a private domain to a private domain, and it passes over through the airspace of a public domain. So, and the example that's given is, imagine that there's two buildings on opposite sides of the street, and there's apartments that are opposite each other, and they both have balconies. So if I'm standing on my balcony and you're across the street in your balcony, and I throw something not to you, but to your balcony, so it lands in your balcony. So I threw from my private domain to your private domain across the street, over the street, which is a public domain. The rabbis will say I'm exempt. I didn't violate the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says I did. Because I passed through the airspace of the public domain, it's like I went from the private domain to the public domain, and then I went from the public domain to the private domain. So Rabbi Akiva would make me liable to bring the sin offering, but the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Akiva, and the halacha is with the rabbis. So you can, without violating Shabbos, there's surely going to be a rabbinic decree about this, but you're going to be exempt from bringing a sin offering for throwing from one balcony to another across the street. Now here's where it gets interesting. If the balcony is on the same side of the street, right? So, let's say that we have a big building and it has two balconies over the same street, but we're on the same side of the street. Okay, so let me make sure I'm going to get this right. So if I throw an object from my balcony to your balcony, but we're on the same side of the street, so it's going to be the same law. It's just like if I threw it across the street, because I am going to cross through the airspace of the public domain. We're still going to go over the sidewalk that's on our side of the street, but I'm throwing from private domain to private domain. However, if our balconies are pretty close together, and I pass something to you on your balcony, so I pass from me on my private balcony to you on my private domain, to you on your balcony, which is your private domain, and I pass something to you, so now we're both going to be liable to bring the sin offering for carrying on Shabbos. Now this is very odd. First of all, because we combine to do it, right? This is something that we combine to do, and we already learned that if I pick up something in the private domain and I pass it to somebody in the public domain and he puts it down, so then neither of us is going to be liable. So what is going on here where I'm passing from a private domain to a private domain over a public domain, but if I threw it, I'd be exempt. If I pass it, I'm liable. And the reason that we're going to be liable for this is because this is exactly the same action that the Levites did in the wilderness when they would unpack the wagons which hold the parts of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, or when they pack up or when they unpack, right? So when the Tabernacle in the wilderness would move from one place to another, right? When we would strike camp, 2 million children of Israel in the desert, strike the camp, move to a new place, set up camp again. So the camp would be, as we've talked about before, the array of the camp, all the 12 tribes would be arranged, 3 in the north, 3 in the east, 3 in the south, 3 in the west. And in the middle would be the tabernacle. And immediately around the tabernacle would be the encampment of the Levites. The Levites, that was understood to be a public domain. But the wagon is like a private domain. And so because they would pass objects from the wagon to whoever was receiving it, this is going to be considered passing in the same way that the Levites did it in the wilderness. And so passing an object from private domain to private domain over a public domain is going to be liable. The two of them are going to be liable for doing that to bring the sin offering. Surprising. And so you would think, well, if passing in that situation renders one liable, why not throwing? But throwing is not something that the Levites did in the wilderness. When they would unload these wagons with the holiest objects in the world, the vessels of the holy tabernacle, or the beams of the holy tabernacle, or the coverings, the tent coverings, or the tables, any of the objects associated with the tabernacle were very holy, and they would treat them with great respect. They wouldn't throw them. They would pass them. So throwing is not going to be included in this prohibition that we learn out from the Levites passing objects from their wagons to the place where they were going to build the Mishkan. Okay. So passing from private domain to private domain over public domain makes you liable, but throwing does not. Let's remember that. Okay, now we arrive at our question, which we've kind of wanted to know for a long time. We've talked so much about carrying and the prohibitions of carrying from one domain to another, from private to public or public to private, or carrying more than 4 amos, 4 cubits, in the public domain, which is tantamount to transferring from one domain to another. So we know it's prohibited. We know it's one of the 39 labors that are prohibited on Shabbos, the 39 labors that were necessary to build the Mishkan. But carrying is odd, because all of the other labors, the other 38 labors that we needed to create the Mishkan, to create the tabernacle in the desert, all had a creative component, a constructive component, right? It was all parts of the process of making something. Carrying, just moving something from one place to another, it doesn't feel like building or selecting or gathering or threshing or weaving or writing. All these other labors are creative in one sense or another. They're productive. But carrying just seems like moving. So what is the source for the fact that carrying is included in these labors of building the Mishkan? And the answer, it's not that surprising. The answer is that carrying is prohibited because the people were asked, right, the children of Israel were asked to donate materials to build the tabernacle. And they were motivated and their hearts were filled. And it was the first capital campaign for a synagogue or a house of worship, right? The first capital campaign in history for a house of worship. And it was a successful capital campaign. People brought and they kept bringing. In fact, eventually they brought so much that they told Aaron, and Aaron told Moses, they brought enough. Tell them to stop bringing. But they couldn't have made a tabernacle if the people hadn't brought the materials that they were donating. The crimson, the scarlet, and blue thread, the silver and gold and copper, the acacia wood, all of the textiles and the hides, everything that people brought, they brought, right? They brought it. They brought it from their encampment. So if they were, let's say, somebody from the tribe of Reuben, they were taking, their stuff was, with them in the encampment of the Reubenites, and then they would bring it to the encampment of the Levites, where the Mishkan was going to be built. And interestingly, the encampment of the Levites was considered the public domain, or at least they crossed through the public domains, sort of no man's land between one encampment and another. But actually, the Levite encampment wasn't considered a private domain because it would contain the Mishkan, and ultimately because the Levites were not going to be given land. So symbolically, they already were occupying public property, the public domain. Once they entered Israel, all the other tribes were given land holdings. The Levites were not. Their portion was with God. They would serve in the temple, and so that they could sustain themselves, they would live in the cities, and they would receive the tithes of all the other tribes so that they could do their work as the Levites. Okay, so the source for the prohibition on carrying is that the people brought materials for the Mishkan so that it could be built. What is the source for throwing? Carrying, okay, we get it. We've already discussed the fact that when the Levites would load or unload the wagons, they would pass these objects because they were holy. So carrying, we understand the people brought, but they wouldn't throw these objects. So why is throwing tantamount to carrying? And so what we're going to see is, well, one source that's suggested is that the weavers who were creating the textiles, the fabrics that the tabernacle, which is a large tent really, sometimes called the tent of meeting, that the weavers who were making these fabrics out of the threads and wool thread and linen thread that were donated, when they would be weaving, if you've ever seen a weaver using a loom, it's like they have something called a shuttle, right? Where it has the thread on the end of it, and the loom has, these threads that go like this and like that. And then once they go like that, they throw the shuttle through so that the horizontal thread will come through, and then it gets pushed back against the ones that have already gone through, and then the shuttle is thrown through again. And the shuttle would be thrown, at least 4 cubits, because these textiles were, let's say, 6 feet wide. But the Gemara objects. Yes, but you can't. If you throw something and there's a thread attached to it that's still attached to the person who's throwing it from the spot that he's throwing it, so you haven't actually thrown it. It remains attached to the place from where it was thrown. So then the Gemara answers, right, but on the final throw, when they would cut the thread and then throw the shuttle back, or if one weaver was lending his shuttle to another weaver, then these things were being thrown, and that is suggested to be the source for why throwing is not going to be permitted. But then, okay, but then throwing sounds like something different than carrying. If that's our source, it seems like, well, that should be actually a different labor. Maybe there's 40 prohibited labors. Why is throwing going to be considered a form of carrying? And the answer that's given is because we have a tradition. They don't actually have a source for why throwing is going to be tantamount to carrying. A few related ideas are suggested, but it's not spelled out in the Torah. And so we learn out that the reason throwing is considered like carrying is because we have a tradition that goes all the way back to the wilderness, that throwing is considered a form of carrying. Now, in terms of the source for carrying, right, that why can't we carry, is it enough to say that the people were bringing? Maybe we can do better than that. Maybe there's something a little bit more specific where we really see that somebody was prohibited to carry. So Rabbi Yehuda brings down in the name of Shmuel that we learn you can't carry from the wood gatherer. Now, the wood gatherer was the first person, right? The first person to receive a death penalty for violating halacha, for violating one of the commandments. Who was he? He was a person who went out and gathered wood on Shabbos. And they asked Moses, what should we do? And Moses asked God, and they said, well, he was warned. It's in the presence of everybody, with God's self in the camp. I don't think that in later generations this would have really generated the death penalty, But in that situation, in the sort of hypercritical situation where the people were already stiff-necked and rebellious, and Moses was having problems leading them, here the wood gatherer was sentenced. He received a death sentence there in the wilderness. The problem with saying that the wood gatherer, who was clearly he was carrying wood on Shabbos, but that's not all he was doing. He carried wood on Shabbos, yes, but he also gathered the wood. So, and we learn out in a Beseira that he wasn't just picking dead wood off the ground, he was also tearing sticks off living trees, and he was gathering them together in a pile, and he was carrying them. So there's at least 3 labors that he was involved in, which are all prohibited. So we're not going to be able to learn out from the wood gatherer as a concrete and certain source that's why you can't carry on Shabbos. And so in the end, we accept that it's a tradition that goes back to the wilderness, that carrying is one of the 39 labors that was part of building the Mishkan. And once we understand that, then we understand that it's prohibited on Shabbos, and we don't need the fact that the wood gatherer was carrying on Shabbos in order to understand that carrying is not permitted on Shabbos, because all 39 labors that were involved in building the Mishkan, we know that the construction of the Mishkan would pause on Shabbos. That we saw. That right as Moses was instructing the people, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to build it. And then the commandment of observing Shabbos was repeated right in that passage in the Torah. And that's how our sages have derived all along that what is it that we can't do on Shabbos? Any of the labors that were involved in building the Mishkan, the Tabernacle. There were 39 of them. Carrying is one of them. Now that we're talking about the wood gatherer, we're going to learn a little bit incidentally about him. That the wood gatherer is somebody who died for his sin in the desert. And later, we're going to have the incident of the daughters of Zelophehad, who, when the land is going to be apportioned to all the children of Israel once they reach the promised land, there's going to be a problem because some families didn't have sons, right? So this one family, this man Zelophehad, he had 5 daughters and no sons, and I guess he didn't have sons-in-law either, and he died in the desert. And so they would challenge when the land is being distributed, and they're going to say, hey, what about our father? He died for his own sin, which means that he didn't die in the incident of Korach and then the rebellion against Moses. He died for something that he himself did. Okay, he paid the price. He died. He received the death penalty. So therefore, he's made up for his sin. He's gone, but his account is square, as it were. So then the daughters of Zelophehad, these 5 daughters, said to Moses, we should inherit. We shouldn't be left out just because our father isn't here today. Moses brought that problem to God and said, well, these women are saying they should be included in the inheritance, even though there's no male representative. It was a very patriarchal society, as you can imagine, back then. But God said to Moses, they have spoken correctly. And so they did inherit. They received a portion for their family once they would enter the promised land. Now, the daughters of Zelophehad are identified here by Rabbi Akiva in this discussion as the daughters of the wood gatherer. So Zelophehad is identified as the wood gatherer by Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira challenges Akiva and says, what are you doing? The Torah was silent about the identity of the wood gatherer. So you're going to be judged for making this statement. Either you've identified somebody that the Torah was silent about, so maybe there's a reason why he wasn't supposed to be identified, not to embarrass him, not to humiliate him. He paid the price. Why does he need to be identified by you as the wood gatherer if his identity was kept silent in the Torah? Or worse, if you're wrong and he and Zelophehad was not the wood gatherer, then you've slandered this righteous man. Why, what gives you the right to do that? So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira makes a pretty strong point. The Gemara will answer that, well, Rabbi Akiva, it's not like he was just, making it up. He had a reason to make this connection. He used the principle called the Gezerah Shava, a verbal analogy, which is that, the daughters said, our father died of his own sin, and the wood gatherer died for his own sin, so this must be the same guy. And then Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is going to challenge Akiva on another one of these kinds of statements, because Akiva said that in the incident when Aaron and Miriam sort of gossip about Moses, right? And it's not like they were being malicious gossips. In that incident, it's not spelled out in the Torah, but we have a tradition that what they were talking about, what they were whispering about in terms of Moses, was the fact, and we covered this a few weeks ago, that Moses, because he was, like going into a state of prophecy frequently, and God would happen upon Moses. In other words, God would speak to Moses quite often. And so Moses felt, since all the people had been told at Mount Sinai before God revealed God's self to the entire people, that they should not have marital relations for 3 days before God's incredible appearance to all of them. And then at that time they said, it was too much for us. Moses, you talk to God and you receive the Torah for us and you just communicate to us. That's good enough. For us, it's too overwhelming when God talks to us directly. And God said, that's fine, I'll talk to Moses. So Moses felt, well, since God is talking to me frequently, I have to at all times be ready to receive communication from God. And so he physically parted from his wife. They didn't divorce her or anything. He still loved her, but he stopped having relations with her. I mean, he's a man in well on in his years. When they come out of Egypt, he's in his 80s. By the time they finish, he's 120 years old. So one can question how much did he give up. But the fact is, at any age, husbands and wives want to be together. So it was a big sacrifice. And Miriam and Aaron were sort of talking on behalf of Moses' wife, Zipporah, like, hey, this is wrong. You shouldn't deprive her of having the physical intimacy with her husband. You should do better than that. And that's what they were whispering about. And God didn't like it, right? And God became angry at them. Now we know that Miriam was punished in this sort of affair of this gossiping, and that she received, ritual leprosy, right? Biblical leprosy, which is not leprosy as we know it. It's tzara'as. We've talked about this before. It's a skin condition, physical manifestation of a spiritual malady. Because she was whispering and gossiping about the leader of the Jewish people, her brother Moses, she broke out, like where her skin turned all white. Eventually Moses would pray for her, a very short and very effective prayer, that she should be healed. And she was healed, but she had to remain outside the encampment for 7 days until she could become ritually pure again and return. But what it says is that God was angry at them, meaning Miriam and Aaron, both of Moses' siblings, his sister and his brother. So Rabbi Akiva learns out from that Aaron also received that same tzara'as. He also had that skin condition, and his skin turned white, and he also had to go through that same purification. That is not spelled out in the Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says to Akiva, what are you doing? The Torah was silent on this matter, so either you revealed something that the Torah chose not to reveal, or worse, Aaron was not stricken with tzara'as, and you've now slandered that righteous man. And, so Akiva had a good reason to learn that out, right? To say that because it said God was angry at them, and since we saw that when God was angry at Miriam, she received tzara'as, therefore we could assume that Aaron also received tzara'as. But when it comes to slandering an individual, so maybe you shouldn't make this legitimate homily on the plural them, or this legitimate gezerah shava, this legitimate verbal analogy that we do in other places, because it might be slandering the wood gatherer. And basically, there's not really an answer to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Akiva's learning was legitimate, but maybe he shouldn't have done it. That's where it's left. Something to think about. And to sort of further this idea about whenever, you're in your learning, you're going to sort of walk into the zone of embarrassing or humiliating or, God forbid, slandering another person, you really have to tread very cautiously. And here we're going to learn out that from Reish Lakish, the great Rabbi Reish Lakish, who was the great partner in learning to Rabbi Yochanan, that Reish Lakish says that Moses himself was punished for suspecting innocent people of something that they were not guilty of. Let me read this little passage to you. On the topic of Miriam's leprosy, the Gemara cites that which Reish Lakish said. One who suspects the innocent of indiscretion is afflicted in his body. It will make you sick to be suspicious and to verbalize your suspicions of other people who turn out to be innocent, right? There's a time and a place to rebuke people. It's best done privately. If you are going to publicly rebuke somebody, talk about somebody to a third party, that's bad. That's really bad. That gets into that area of lashon hara, of evil tongue, evil speech, gossiping, tale-bearing, and it is not good, even when Moses does it. What happens here? So one who suspects the innocent of indiscretion is afflicted in his body, as it is written, quote, and Moses answered and said, but they will not believe me and will not hearken to my voice, for they will say, God did not appear to you. Now this is at the incident of the burning bush, when God says to Moses, you're going to go to Egypt and you're going to tell the people that I have heard their cries and I'm going to now redeem them from slavery and pull them out of Egypt. And you're going to go to Pharaoh, etc. But first you're going to go tell the leaders of the Jewish people that you are God's representative and the time has come for them to be freed. And Moses said about the leaders of the Jewish people to God, they won't believe me, right? So he's ascribing beliefs and intents and sort of, inner state, their thoughts, something Moses has no idea who those people are, or what they believe, or what they're going to believe. But he is essentially slandering them to God. And what was the result? They will not believe me. And it is revealed before the Holy One, blessed be He, that the Jewish people would believe. So the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, they are believers, the children of believers, and ultimately you will not believe. So the thing that Moses accused them of, it was revealed before God that ultimately Moses would be guilty of the thing that he accused other people of. This is wisdom with a capital W. When we ascribe bad beliefs, bad intentions, bad thoughts to other people, so often, what we're really talking about is ourselves. And we will ultimately pay a price for that. So Reish Lakish explains. So, and they are believers. Right? They are believers, as it is written. And the people believed once they heard that God had remembered the children of Israel and that he saw their affliction, and they bowed and they prostrated. They did believe and they would believe Moses. How do we know they're believers? These are people who maintained their faith in God for 400 years. Well, it's not 400 years, but for hundreds of years while they were enslaved. They kept their Jewish names. They kept their Jewish practices. They remained Jews in the midst of great, great adversity, and they cried out to God. They were believers, the children of believers, right? And that's what Reish Lakish is saying. Moses forgot that. He should have realized that. And in any case, he shouldn't have ascribed shouldn't say out loud what what he claims they will believe or not believe. And why are they called the children of believers? As it says with regard to Abraham, our patriarch. And he believed in God, and he counted it for him as righteousness. That's from Genesis 15:6. And why does Reish Lakish say that God said, ultimately, you will not believe to Moses, as it is stated? This is from the book of Numbers, chapter 20, verse 12. Ultimately, you will not believe, as it is stated. And God said to Moses and to Aaron, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses would pay a heavy price for that. That is the incident when Moses was just it was like the people were so difficult and stubborn, leading 2 million people for 40 years in the wilderness, constantly complaining, constantly, rebelling and complaining and having problems and bringing their problems to Moses. And he was just, at a certain point, he just got sick of it. And there was a time when they got to a new place, and it was actually after Miriam died. So we have a tradition that the reason that every time they were living in the desert, right? For 40 years, they were living in the desert, but they never had to worry about water. Why? Because every time they went to an encampment, there was a spring of water. And that spring of water was understood to be in the merit of Moses' sister, Miriam. Miriam's great merit, she was a prophetess herself and such a holy person, so holy that it was in her merit that there was always running water in the encampment. But after she died, the next place where the encampment went, there was no water. And so the people murmured and complained. Now Moses is mourning for his sister. He's grieving. He's grieving that he's lost his sister who, watched over him when he was a baby, floated down the Nile and was ultimately picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. And then it was Moses' sister Miriam, who was 6 years old, and said to her, hey, would you like to get a nurse, a wet nurse, so that this child can, eat and drink and survive? And brought her own mother, Moses' mother, to be the wet nurse for the baby Moses in Pharaoh, in the house of Pharaoh's daughter. And in fact, it was Miriam who argued with her parents, who divorced because all the baby boys were being thrown in the river because Pharaoh had heard that one of these baby boys would grow up to depose him. And so they were throwing all the baby boys in the river. So Moses' parents, they had Aaron, they had Miriam, and then they said, we have to divorce and not be together anymore as husband and wife, because if we have another baby, we might have to throw it in the river. And it was Miriam, 5 years old, when she said this. She said, Pharaoh decreed against Jewish boys. But what you've done is worse, because you're not going to have a boy or a girl. It's like you're decreeing against not only the boys, but girls too. And they accepted her argument. They got back together. They had a baby, and that was Moses. So Moses, all his life, was very close to his sister Miriam, and now she's dead. So he's angry, he's grieving, the people are complaining that there's no water. He prays to God, what should I do? God says, talk to the rock. Talk to the rock. In other words, there was a rock there, and Moses was supposed to say to the rock, bring forth water. But Moses was so angry at the people that they were bothering him with his complaints while he's in the midst of essentially sitting Shiva for his sister Miriam, that he strikes the rock with his staff. Water came out of it so that Moses would not be embarrassed, would not be humiliated in front of the people that he tried to bring water and it didn't work. But God told him to speak to the rock, and Moses struck it. Now the punishment was very severe for this. It was because of this incident that God says to Moses, you're not going to enter the promised land. It seems like, oh my God, he led these people for so long through so much hardship. He's not even going to get to go in and see the promised land. No, but perhaps what God was really saying is, your time has passed. You've done an amazing job, but they need a new young leader for the wars that they're going to have to fight when they enter that land and throw out these child-sacrificing heathens who are living in it. At any rate, Moses had said initially at the burning bush that those people, when I say that God sent me, they're not going to believe me. And what happened? They did believe him, and it was Moses who would ultimately be accused by God that you did not believe in me to sanctify me. You didn't believe that you could just speak to that rock. You took it on yourself to strike it like something extra was needed. Why does Reish Lakish say that one who does this, who suspects the innocent of some kind of indiscretion or bad belief or bad thoughts, Reish Lakish doesn't just say don't do that. He says you will be afflicted in your body if you do that. Because right after Moses says, they will not believe me, God says to Moses, I will give you a sign. Now, there was the sign that he could throw his staff down and it would turn into a snake, right? But there was another sign that was given right after Moses said, they won't believe me. God said, put your hand inside your cloak in your bosom and now take it out. And Moses' hand came out and it had tsaras, right? This same ritual leprosy that his sister was struck with when she gossiped against Moses. Moses, we read that and it's just, it'll be like a miraculous sign. You'll be able to show them, that you can make your skin white as snow and leprous, as a sign from God. But God chose a very specific sign. At that moment, he made Moses' hand leprous, right? With ritual leprosy, in other words, tsaras. And why was he punished with that affliction? Because he ascribed bad thoughts, bad suspicions to the leaders that he was going to go and see. It's a great takeaway for us. Nina and I talk about this all the time. I really learned it from Nina to verbalize it this way. Whenever you're in a debate with anybody, a loved one, a family member, a friend, a stranger, especially if you're talking about something as sensitive as religion or politics, and you really disagree with somebody, okay, fine. So talk about the facts that you disagree about, be civil about it, and see if you can arrive at a truth together. But don't ascribe bad intentions to this person. Don't accuse people out loud that they have the wrong beliefs, that they want bad things. Don't be sarcastic about them and what their thought process is, because you have no idea. We have no idea what other people are thinking. And when we ascribe bad intentions to other people, bad thoughts, indiscretions in their mind, when we assign that to them, we say about them that their thoughts are bad, we're going to make ourselves sick. And we learn that out from Reish Lakish talking about Moses saying that the people will not believe me. Okay, let me check the comments for any comments or questions. Okay, what have we got here? Ascendless says, why didn't Moses see the promised land? Was it because of his sins? Only one, just this one sin that God says, because you didn't believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the people. In the incident when God said, speak to the rock, and Moses instead struck the rock. In that situation, Moses did not obey. But when you think of all the incredible good that Moses did, and we weigh against that just such a small thing, why did it amount to such a huge punishment for him? And I would say it's because it was just time. It was time to pass the baton of leadership to Joshua. They needed Joshua, a much younger leader, for the wars they were going to have to fight in the Promised Land. Moses is understood in the Jewish tradition to not only be the greatest prophet who ever lived and who ever will live, but also somebody who had a perfect life, a complete life. It doesn't mean he was a perfect person. He made lots of mistakes, but he died on his birthday at the age of 120 years. And that's why we always say to people, when we bless them, may you enjoy whatever. May you enjoy life. May you be learning. May you be strong. May you be wise to 120. And we learn that out from Moses, who lived to 120. And anybody who dies on their own birthday, it's a sign from heaven that they did good. They really lived, a life. They completed their mission. Whatever it is that you were sent in this world to do, If you die on your birthday, it's a sign from heaven that you fulfilled your mission in this world. Bill Eldridge says, I'm reminded of a line from my favorite novel, The Once and Future King, paraphrased, the great renunciation takes two. I'm not sure what that means, unless it's you're saying that if people are feuding, it takes two people to make peace. I'm not sure what that means. Martin Mendelsberg says, we carry the weight of our responsibilities and commitments to Hashem. Perhaps the physical actions must be traded for spiritual actions on Shabbat. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we got into this discussion about intentions, etc., because we were discussing carrying on Shabbos. How do we get over to Tzara'as? Because we're talking about the wood gatherer, and that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was actually rebuking Akiva for making a legitimate interpretation of a verse in the Torah, but one which might, expose somebody whose name had been left private, the wood gatherer, or possibly even slander Zelophehad if he was not the wood gatherer. And so even though Akiva's interpretation was a legitimate form of interpreting the Torah, Rabbi Yehuda was saying maybe it's better not to do that because, we've learned elsewhere, it is better to jump in a fiery furnace than to humiliate a person publicly, even a dead person. Okay. And Bill Eldridge is saying the line is from Guinevere's thought process about her and Lancelot when he wants to break off their relationship. For spiritual reasons. Very good. It is not easy. It's never going to be easy to rise in holiness, to rise in spirituality. I feel like in our culture today, there is it's a prejudice, right? There's a prejudice in the culture against people of faith. It used to be that most people were people of faith. I think probably in America today, still, most people have faith in the Creator. But the people who run the media, essentially, right? So the people that run Hollywood, the people who run the news, the people who run the universities, not so much. Not so much. And so they have this, this attitude toward people of faith that, they're just superstitious people who need a crutch because they're weak. What could be more false? First of all, if you've been learning with us here on AT Daily, or you do any kind of Bible study yourself, you know how intricate and sophisticated and deep the study of Scripture is. There's nothing simplistic or superstitious and feeble-minded about it. And furthermore, the work to be a righteous person, to be somebody, who's going to do the work of changing themselves and to rise up above the temptations that assault us constantly. I mean, there's so many things that we know are wrong to do, and we're just drawn to do them because, we're souls riding around in bodies, and the body wants. Right? The body always wants. The body wants to overeat. The body wants to have sex that it shouldn't have. The body wants to, brag and be arrogant and lord it and have power over others. And it's the soul, right, from a place of spirituality and learning and eternal values that wants us to be kind and to learn to be kind and to learn to sacrifice so that we can be kind. It's something that I'm sure it's been said somewhere else, but I don't know. This formulation came to me young, before I was even a person of faith, really. But I was always a very spiritual person, and it just came to me at a young age. The strong man is kind, and it takes strength to be kind. The strong man is kind means it takes strength to be kind. It takes strength to be a righteous person. It takes work. It is not easy. Shabbos is a time to refresh yourself in that work. By pausing all the work of the week, we have 25 hours from Friday night to Saturday night where we can reflect and ask ourselves, I was so busy all week. Okay, but now I could just breathe and ask myself in front of my Maker, how am I doing? Was I kind this week? Did I do my duty? Could I have done better? Why did you send me into this world? What is my mission? What is my mission? What is my mission? Am I fulfilling my mission? You need that refresher so that you can grow in faith and you can grow in strength and you can grow in kindness and you can get closer to fulfilling your mission in this world. What is this? Lynn Jobs says, does the solar birthday in the Western calendar also equate with fullness of years like the Hebrew birthday when one is both born and dies on the same day? I have a relative who achieved this on the solar calendar. I don't know, Lynn. That's a good question. But I'll tell you something. Somebody who, is not particularly tied to the Hebrew calendar and really measures their life according to the solar calendar that the rest of the culture uses, and that person was born and died on the same day, I can't give you a 100% certain answer, but it seems to me, and I'm not a rabbi, I can't poskin, and I haven't done the research on this particular question, but it seems to me that if a person is born and dies on the same day in the solar calendar, that, there's a good chance that God is sending a message to that person and their loved ones. It seems to me. I can't guarantee it. The teaching is, for sure on the Hebrew birthday. But it seems to me that's at least evidence that person lived a very full life and completed their mission. Okay, my friends, that is what I've got for us today. May we all be zoiche. May we merit to live full lives and complete our mission in this world, and perhaps not even be taken from this world because Mashiach is going to come in our lifetimes. But if for some reason Mashiach shouldn't come in our lifetimes, may we be blessed to live complete lives like Moses did, and to be inspired by Moses and the Torah that Moses brought from heaven, from God to us, and learn from it every day. All the best, my holy brothers.